Here. Hooray. Hi,
Excellent.
Pierre. Can you see Pierre is tuning in from Wales? So that's wonderful. I'm so glad that we have at least one person. Hooray. This is Dr. Kim Alexander, she, her. She's a gynecologist, and I actually don't know where you live.
I live near Toronto in Brampton,
Mm-hmm.
which is the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the First Credit.
Perfect. Thank you for saying that. And it's especially important today. Can you explain why?
Yeah, so today is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, which is colloquially known as Orange Shirt Day. And the reason that that's the story that's often told on today, which is a day of remembering, is based on the residential schools stories of the survivors. So this day was partly to remember those people who survived the residential schools and their progeny, right? Many of them are either like living survivors now, or their parents or grandparents went through that system. But also to think about the ways that colonization and colonial mindsets have affected all of the systems that we work in and write in and live in. So important to think about that today and every day as we interact in the world.
So true. And I'm talking to you from the territory of the St. Lawrence Iroquois, Mohawk, and Haudenosaunee nations.
So we're
which is around the St. Lawrence area, kind of east of Ottawa, between Ottawa and Montreal. I live in a rural area.
Great. And we're here today. I'm here today because I'm super excited about Melissa's upcoming book, The Shapes of Wrath. Yes, and which is live on Kickstarter now. You can find her on Kickstarter. And which is a murder mystery that's set in the operating suite. Melissa,
Right.
what made you decide to choose that as the setting for this novel?
Well, I love surgery. You know surgery more than I do as a obstetrics gynecologist specialist. I ended up specializing in emergency medicine instead. But what I really enjoy about the operating room is the people, actually, for the most part. Like when I went into general surgery, I was worried. Like I just thought they were going to basically beat me up the whole time. We showed up early, but actually, the nurse who was in charge came with a bunch of Timbits, which are like little donut holes for us. And I was like, what? Are they actually going to be nice to us? Like I cut off my hair, like I cut it short because I was like, I won't have time to wash my hair while I'm on surgery. And I just thought it was going to be so awful. But actually, the people joked around a lot. And it was a lot of fun as well as just terribly hard work. But you can imagine also just, you're up at all hours, and it was the most brutal rotation that I had physically and mentally. So I thought that would be a good place for a murder mystery.
Absolutely. I agree with you on the team aspect. One of the best things for me about the OR is you're 30 centimeters away from your surgical assist. You're 30 centimeters away from your scrub nurse. You're, a foot away from your anesthesia colleague, and you've got one or two circulating nurses in the room. So you've got this team that's in incredibly close quarters for 8 to 16 hours at a time. And if you're not kind to people, if you don't respect their skills, if you're not encouraging of their growth, you're not going to have a good day, right? So the team environment is such a huge focus and strength of working in the operating room. So yeah, it was really, really fun reading your book, looking at those relationships and the dynamics, right? The challenging interpersonal dynamics of working with very detail oriented, very accomplished, and occasionally very prickly staff in close quarters.
That's right, because it can be a bit like high school or something, or middle school or something like that, you can be very close, or like that can be a lot of conflict too. And holding grudges and stuff like that. So I thought it would be interesting for murder. And in my case, also, there's a supernatural aspect to this book that the other Hope C books didn't have. So I'm actually just going to try and move so you can see the title, The Shapes of Wrath, in case anybody wants to look it up. And I put the link on YouTube anyway. Facebook, for some reason, is being a bum about links. But Kim, I believe you're a pagan. Is that right?
Yeah. So
Yes. Okay. So feel comfortable talking about that.
yeah, many years ago, probably when I was about 15, I became a neo-pagan, and that's been currently I attend a Unitarian Universalist congregation, and I didn't know anything about UU churches growing up, but the neat thing about UU is that it doesn't matter what your beliefs are. So you can be an atheist UU, you can be a Buddhist UU, you can be a pagan UU or a Christian UU. Your belief system is irrelevant because beliefs are just stories that we tell ourselves about how the world works, right? And those stories are informed by our culture and our families and all of these things about our lives. But your beliefs don't matter. What matters is your actions in the world. So how do you live your life? How do you actually carry out the work of being a good person, which I think is directly tied to the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation too, right? Like it's not about the words or just wearing the t-shirt. It's about actually like how do you work in the world in a way that works towards indigenizing our spaces and supporting our Indigenous friends and siblings. But I think it's really interesting because that ties really closely into the question that we wanted to address today, which is what makes you really angry.
That's right. Yeah, just because that The Shapes of Wrath is the first book in the series on hope and the 7 deadly sins. So I was hoping Kim wouldn't mind talking about wrath or anger and what makes you angry.
Right. So when you asked that question and I started thinking about, what is it that makes me really angry? For me, it's hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. Right? When the words that you say don't match with your actions. When you say all the right things and then behave in ways that are really nefarious and manipulative behind the scenes. So for me, and that's tied into, I think, my UU way of being in the world, is like, you got to walk the walk and talk the talk. And when those things don't match up, that's what really gets under my skin.
That makes total sense to me. And then do you confront the hypocrites or pray? I don't know what you do.
I think it depends. For me, it's all around boundaries and picking your battles. So sometimes someone is such a hypocrite and they're, over and over again, they've shown a refusal to engage, a refusal to hear, or a refusal to change. In cases where you're just dealing with someone who doesn't have the capacity for personal growth, you just have to walk away. You use a technique that's called gray rock, which is you behave as uninterestingly as a little pebble in the street. No one's going to notice you. You just keep your mouth shut, let that person say what they're going to say, give a very generic response that doesn't change, that's the same every time, and move on, right? Some battles aren't worth fighting, and some hypocrites are never going to change. But if it's someone who you have a relationship with, right, where you care about them and you think that they're capable of growth, then yeah, you got to call that out in a loving, you got to call that in, right? So calling out is an accusation. Calling someone in is creating a space where you feel connected and welcomed and loved and saying, listen, like, I know that wasn't your intention. I know that this is important to you. And I have to tell you, in this circumstance or situation, you didn't do what I know you would have liked to do. And how can I support you in that? And how can I, try and help you make amends or make change? So it's all about having those boundaries, right?
I just think when you're talking, I have to think what a tremendous physician you must be. Like how much your patients must love you, because when you talk, you're very deliberate, you listen, you want to bring people in instead of confronting them. Like Well, I feel like I must be a terrible one because I'm just like, okay, let's go. Like,
You're
uh,
an emerge dog. There's a reason for that. I work in sexual health, right? Like
oh,
I
okay.
work in an area where people are very, very vulnerable.
Mhm.
So creating that connection and creating that sense of support and belonging is so, so important because otherwise you're never going to get people at a place where they feel safe. And I really, really think that creating that safe space for people is essential if you're going to provide healthcare that actually meets everybody's needs, right? Like you want that patient to feel like their goals were met as well. And that lets you meet everybody where they're at too, because not everybody has the capacity to achieve perfect health,
That's
right?
so
Like,
true.
let
Yeah.
me tell you, I did not eat a vegetable for dinner tonight. I did not. I did
Okay.
not have the capacity for perfect health.
Okay. Yeah. No, so
Right?
that is a fairly frequent occurrence here. Yeah. Okay.
So, so if we don't all have the capacity for perfect health, how do we support people in meeting their goals, right? And to do that, you have to make sure that they feel safe enough to actually communicate their goals to you rather than what they think they should be saying or what they think you want them to do.
That's fair. I just want to bring into like with Pierre had a question, so I wanted to make sure that we answered him.
Excellent.
And it was actually about Kickstarter. So he said, "Do you know who your pledgers are, or do you only find out when the Kickstarter ends?" So for anybody who doesn't know, Kickstarting is a crowdfunding platform where creative people can just say, "I have this project that I want to get funded." In my case, it's a book, but it could be anything. Like actually, the light on my face right now is also from Kickstarter. I had bought this light that was supposed to go on your computer and provide beautiful light for you, for your face. Um, and we have a well, anyway, we have a set of dishware as well that I gotten off Kickstarter. Anyway, so this is my first one, and I actually was not looking at the pledges because I was worried. Like I don't know, like it's this weird thing. I don't look at my book sales either. Like I don't want to. I never like to be told if I'm not doing well. And in my head, I guess I always think I'm not doing as well as I want to be doing. But the other day I went on Kickstarter and just the default screen seemed to be telling me who my pledgers were and like all this, like a lot of stats, like their names, but also like where they had come from, like whether they came from the direct link or whether they came from Facebook or whether they were on Kickstarter already and stuff like that. So I just paged through and I looked at the people and I told my husband, I was like, most of these people I know. Like they say that Kickstarter has its own ecosystem and you can find new readers there. So I was like, oh, that's fantastic. I really want to meet new readers. But when I was looking at it, I was like, okay, I know these people and thank you very much for anybody who has donated. But I really appreciate it. And I think for some other people, like people who have like 2000% met their goals and stuff like that, that they can have quite a bit of traffic from all areas. And I think some of them keep very good track. Like, for example, you can do Google Analytics on it, which seemed like such a pain to activate, and also as a privacy thing, I didn't do it. But yeah, you can find out who donated, and you can find out some information about them, which I choose not to.
So this
Can
is your
you?
first time using Kickstarter. I didn't know that, Melissa. That's exciting.
My very first time,
New
and I was just
skills, learning and growing.
yes, that's true. Yeah, Kim is big on learning, like throughout life, and actually, if that's a good segue to, it was interesting. I thought it was like you were talking about the stages of life. I think specifically for a woman, but maybe it applies to all people and all genders. Like maybe you can comment on it.
Sure. So we were talking about pagan belief systems earlier, and paganism there's all sorts of different kind of subcategories under it based on various writers and based on various traditions. But in my tradition, it's a feminist spirituality, which generally means that um, one of the pieces of it is that the divine is intrinsic rather than extrinsic. So rather than a God up in the sky, the divine is within each of us. And one of the ways that we personify the divine is in the stages of life. So you can talk about maiden, mother, and crone. So you can divide whether it's a book, right? Your book's maiden years are those kind of early months of that idea percolating in your head and sitting in the shower and thinking about it
Oh,
and getting
interesting.
that outline out, right? Like just when everything is kind of new and fresh and not fully formed, and it's that kind of creative energy, right, in those early times. And then there's the mothering work, which is the down and dirty writing and editing where you just have to put in the hours and put in the focus, and but you're still kind of bringing this thing into the world. um, and then it's the crone years, and the crone years are a time when you're not directly engaged in creating in the same way, but you're using all the wisdom and all the things that you've learned in your many, many years of learning and growing and doing new things to support community, right? So right now you are still in the mothering years, Melissa. You are bringing your books into the world. You are doing all that stuff. But as you change in your career, if you're focused, if your thoughts are, okay, now I'm coming into my croning years, how do I want to be a crone in the world? You start thinking specifically about how you can support your community. So are you offering writing workshops? Are you mentoring young women of color? Are you like, where is it that you have gifts that you can give, and where do you want to focus those to make change in the world going forwards and to leave a legacy behind you? So croning is not associated with a specific age, but it's associated with that desire to start taking everything that's happened, everything that you've developed over a lifetime, and actually starting to leave that legacy.
Even that's so interesting. Like I loved when you brought that up, and even what you just said now about crone as a verb. Like because people just use it as A, an insult, and B, as a noun, like that you're just an old crone sort of thing. Actually, you're saying this is a really active thing, and this is how we build community.
And it's a really conscious choice. One of the magical things about being, I'm not sure how old you are, you're probably fairly close in age to me, but like I've been working in my career for 20 years now, right? That is a long, long time to really hone in on what you're good at and what you're good at that other people aren't good at, right? Like each of us has one thing that by midlife, you're like, you know what? I'm actually better at this than most people, right? For me, it's shamelessness.
Oh,
I
interesting.
do not judge ever. I will hold space for your stuff, but I have compassion for everybody and I do not have shame. So that is really, really different from a lot of people. And that's kind of my piece that I'm really good at that other people don't have. But at this time, so I know now, like this is my special thing. This is my superpower. This is my strength. Back when we were 17, the whole world was in front of you, right? The possibilities were unlimited. You could do anything. You could be anything. You could become an emerge doc. You could become a writer. Whatever you wanted to do, but you didn't know what your strengths were, right? At 17, none of us have lived enough of a life to really know how we shine, right? Whereas now in midlife, same thing. The possibilities are kind of endless. Like we have the attention and the space to do what we want to do. Often we have more resources than we did at 17. We have time and space and opportunity to follow whatever our passions are, but we have that understanding of who we are, which is new to being in this stage of life. And I love that.
Well, what I find interesting, like I have a lot of things to say, but one of them would be when I was 17, I was very worried about what my parents thought. So culturally, it would depend, but the possibilities were not limitless. And when I would meet writers, like full-time writers, I would always ask them two things. I would say, one of them was, what does your parents think? Was one of them. The other one was, how did you know you could go full-time? I found that a really difficult thing to wrestle with. But I was asking Sarah Cortez, one of my editors, and she was like, well, both of my parents have passed away now. And I was like, oh, maybe I don't have to ask my entire life what my parents are, my parents are thinking, and what, how they're judging. It's okay to just make your own decisions now and feel free about it.
Yeah. This
Um,
is another thing that I've been really kind of examining more is I have stopped saying I should do this. I have taken the word should completely out of my vocabulary. Do I want to do it? Or do I not want to do it? Not I should. What I should is what other people think that I should do. My mother thinks I should do this. The Pope thinks I should do this. Whatever. It's other people telling you what you should do. But the question is it in line with my values, right? Like, is it something that I want to do because it works for me, because it makes my life better, or it helps other people in ways that make me feel happy and accomplished and purposeful, right? So taking that I should out becomes easier as we age, right? We're not those teenagers anymore who are depending on the approval of the aunties and the moms and all of that stuff.
yeah, I do feel more comfortable making my own decisions. And then the other thing you said about more resources, I do think like, once I started making money, once I was in an independent practice and I didn't like, fortunately, because of my family, I didn't have a lot of debt for medicine, which is not the reality for most people now. But at the time, I was able to get away with not bankrupting myself. And sometimes people would like, well, quite often, people post online and they'll be like, what should I do? And I realized that my thought, which I know is a privileged thought, was I was like, well, can you throw money at it? Because that makes it so much easier. So, for example, people are very burned, like women are very burned out with their kids. Like, people are just like, oh, motherhood is wonderful. It is wonderful, but it's also really tiring. And sometimes you need to have a good night's sleep, for example. So if you can go somewhere and sleep, you'll just feel so much better before you can tackle the rest of life again.
Right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. 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 So that's kind of, how that pagan framework helps me think and prioritize. And the UU plays really nicely into that because it's not only, how do I frame my understanding of the world, but also, how do I act out those beliefs, right? How do I live that in the world?
Great. And maybe building on that, you had said to me when you read The Shapes of Wrath, one of the things you said was that normally you can't read murder mysteries. So can you just explain why that is?
Yeah, so everyone else in my life loves reading murder mysteries and crime novels at the beach and up at camp and wherever they are. And so they'll pass them on to me and recommend them. And I, diligently open the book and get into it because someone who I love loved it. And inevitably, I get a few pages in and somebody dies and everyone else kind of moves on as to this is a fun mystery to solve. And I'm still stuck on the person who's dead because what about do they have kids? Who's going to miss them? What's the funeral going to be like? Because so in medicine, as you know, having done the kind of work that you do, when someone codes in your emerge or they roll in the ambulance and it's too late, the family shows up. Right. And those are the unforgettable moments of medicine, right? Is when you're there with that grieving family, trying to help them understand and process the loss and move on, right? And create the space in their life where this person used to be and how do you fill it? So I can't read murder mysteries because that piece to me is the biggest piece in the whole story. Forget about, who hit who over the head with the thing. The biggest part of the story is the change in the lives of the people who are left behind, right? When I read your book, I think because of the work that you do, right? That when someone is killed, hope is there thinking about their family and wondering if they're going to be okay and worried about like all of those compassionate impulses that happen in real life when we care for people. They're actually written into your book in ways that are not usual. and in ways that I think make it such a special book because it has that compassion and care for all of the characters, which is pretty awesome.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. Although I don't know if every time Hope has compassion, but I have to say in this one, there is somebody who passes away that really, like I had told the group, I didn't want to die. And I actually had written, didn't die or was almost dead, but not quite dead. And so, and then in the end, like medically, I was like, well, this person is dead. But I could not come to terms with it at first. Like it was so sad to me.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's real life, right? And to be able to hold that space for the humanity of loss and have a fun murder mystery does not happen very often.
It's true, and I found that I was thinking about how I went to BoucherCon, and for the first time I realized that. So that's the big one of the big mystery conferences, and um, one mostly Americans go there, but it is international, and it was in Toronto one year, so that's only 5 hours away from me. But when I went, I was surprised that it turned out that there's well, I guess people love to separate based on interests. So yes, we're all crime writers, but some people write cozies and some people write noir. So those are considered the extreme opposites. And the two don't necessarily get along or and think that the other is valid. So until I went there, I was just like, oh great, we're gonna have a great time together. We all write the same thing, and no, that's not true. So like I would say that cozies thought that the Nuak people were too almost gross with their details, with the blood and the grime and people being ground down by crime. But actually, I thought it was, and of course, and cozies are like cute and they have recipes and nice dogs and cats, and you can and lots of fluffiness so that you feel good about it. But I was struck when Tanis Mallow, who's a Nuak writer, said she thought it was more ethical to have the Nuak people because when somebody dies, you really feel it and you're not glossing over it. Like you really take the time to get hit hard by that death. And so she thought cozies were just because they were light entertainment and making light of death. She thought that was unethical, which I thought was so interesting. And I've tried to bring it up since with cozy writers, and they just stare at me. But overall, I find it really interesting to like because for me, I don't have trouble holding dichotomies in my head. So I'm just like, yes, this is true, and this is true, and they're both interesting, and I read both of them, and I write both of them. But most people can't do that.
That's interesting. Maybe that's your superpower.
Actually, I do like what you said about shameless, but I was going to add that there's a lot of shame, especially for women, and especially for women who like to have sex and who don't feel bad about it. So for Hope's first 9 books, there's a love triangle, and she genuinely loves 2 men at the same time, and it's really difficult because the guys do not like it, like don't want to accept it, and a lot of people thought it was um, slutty for her to have 2 guys, even if she wasn't like physically with them both at the same time. That they just thought she should not care for 2 people at the same time, and which I always find weird. Like I just have my own moral compass, I guess. Like when people would be like, "Ew, she slept with him on the first night she met him," and I'm like, "Okay." And they're like, "Oh, but doesn't it bother you?" And I'm like, "No, I think it has nothing to do with me. And if you had a good time, then that's okay. Like it's not up to me to judge that."
And the
And
interesting question
yeah,
for me, right, when someone comes across with a really strong moral judgment like that, the question is why? Like, where did that come from? Like, you made a really strong statement there about what you accept as healthy human behavior. Why? Right? Like, what are your beliefs about how people love and how women are supposed to be and how men are supposed to be that inform that very strong viewpoint that you're trying to impose on everybody? Because yeah, that's an interesting wanting to put people in boxes of what's what behavior is okay or what behavior is acceptable, right? But who gets to decide what that behavior is? Did you do any reading about polyamory when you were crafting those scenes with the love triangle?
I didn't read about it, but I have read some about it on there, like Psychology Today has one of the columnists is interested in polyamory, so has talked about it, and some of my friends are polyamorous.
Yeah,
So um we
right.
and
Because
of course the difference is like then all the people agree with it. Like that's then there's not as much conflict when you're all in agreement.
right,
Which I know takes a lot of negotiation and work. Um,
absolutely. But it's a framework, right, that not everybody is familiar with. It's a different kind of framework for romantic relationships than the traditional monogamous relationship that our white Anglo-Saxon Protestant society with colonial roots, since we're talking about
mhm.
colonialism and reconciliation today, like it's interesting to ask where those beliefs come from. Because if you look at older cultures and native cultures and things like that, it's often not a concept that's present in those places. So it often comes down to those remnants of our older colonial cultures that are coming into play.
Yes, I mean, so I had read in a Jodi Picoult novel that she said Egypt did not have a word for virgin, just didn't exist, like because there wasn't this such an emphasis on the pre-sex or having sex stage, like it's just part of life. Um, and of course, there were matriarchal societies where I was totally fine, to have more than one man. I was disappointed though to read that there are some societies where you would have like the women would have more than one husband, but then sometimes it would just be like you had to marry the brother because your husband died, and it wasn't actually a good deal for the woman. I was like, why is it not a good deal for the woman? But yeah, I do think that because I read romances as well, and I would feel frustrated because even when there's a love triangle, like say Twilight, for example, I don't know if you read that, but it was always clear she was always with the one guy. She was always going to go for the vampire, and I was like, but he's not interesting. Why don't you go for the werewolf? But I do love
You
werewolves.
Team Jacob, huh?
Yes,
Now
yeah,
we're
oh
setting lines.
yeah, for sure. I would just skim all this stuff. I'm just like, God, the vampire again. Like, okay, good. Jacob's here. Yeah, let's talk about him. So, although I don't know if I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't finished reading the series, but I didn't feel comfortable with the ending, how she resolved the love triangle. But anyway, a lot of love triangles in romances would still have that kind of colonial worldview where, but she only really loves one. Like more than one can want her, but she only wants one.
That's right, because
And
she's a good girl.
yeah, she's a good girl. Whereas I'm just like, no, that's not so interesting. Or, like I have good girls, but I don't always write good girls.
Yeah. And you write good girls who don't necessarily do what they should do.
It's more interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's more interesting when people are driven by their strong internal values, right? Regardless of whether that person's values agree with yours or not, if the character is driven by strong internal values, that's an interesting character, right? That's someone who you want to see what they do next because they're not necessarily doing what's expected of them.
I like that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess I have taken up half an hour of your time. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today about wrath, the shapes of wrath, and your beliefs. So thank you very much.
Well,
And
it's been
yeah,
just a joy reading your book. Hopefully, you'll get lots of traffic towards that Kickstarter, and I know you've already met your Kickstarter goal, which is awesome.
yay! Yeah.
And I look forward to the release of your book. Are we going with November 26th? Is that our date?
Oh, no, that's a date for Cornwall. Like I just happened to be going to the Cornwall Public Library because I'll tell everybody now because the Writers Union of Canada has sponsored a talk and it had to take place before December 1st. But that's not when that book will be out. But I will be talking about my other books. I will talk about The Shapes of Wrath, whether it's in final form or not. But the background thing. I do have my Sorry, guys. I do have my science fiction and fantasy books that are ready to go. So this one is Dog versus Aliens, Grandma Othello, and Shaolin Monks in Space. So I have collections of short stories, which actually Pierre is familiar with if he's still around, which is, um, he has my Chinese Cinderella collection. Chinese Cinderella, Fairy Godfathers, and Beastly Beauty. So those ones I will be talking about them in November 26th, and then The Shapes of Wrath will officially come out February 1st. But if you are through Kickstarter, then I'm going to try and get you at least the electronic copy before Christmas, and perhaps paper, depending if the stars align.
Very good. So I will look forward to having it in my hot little hands. And yeah, thank you for writing it and for the opportunity to pre-read, because it's been super fun.
Thank you so much, Kim. Thank you for your time and expertise. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Pierre, and anybody else who was able to join us. Love you. Bye.
Night.